We are recording.
Yeah.
Good morning, afternoon, evening to our global listenership. Welcome to another episode of the Small Data Forum. Number 46, a magic number if you are a MotoGP fan, but I have a sense my fellow hosts probably aren't. So 46 is the race number of Valentino Rossi, 9 times world champion in motorcycle racing. I've seen him live a couple of times in the past. How is that relevant for today's podcast, you might ask? It is not. Just the first thing that came to my mind when I thought of 46. It's a front of mind activation thing. That thing that marketing still hasn't quite figured out in spite of all its efforts over 100 years or more. That is something we will come back to. But first, of course, a warm St. George's Day welcome on this 23rd of April to my co-podders Neville Hobson, experienced podcaster and social media strategist. Good morning, Neville.
Good morning, Thomas and Sam.
And Sam Knowles, book author, keynote speaker, and managing director of brand storytelling consultancy Inside Agents. Morning, Sam.
Morning, Thomas. Hello, Neville.
I am Thomas Stoeckle, overworked part-time educator and partner at comsagency.io Health. This time last year, it would have all been about COVID with a sprinkling of Brexit and Trump. Long time ago, isn't it? It seems we have moved on a little bit, but some things are kind of timeless evergreens. One of those is government sleaze. And in this particular case, what I would call the 2021 version of anarchy in the UK. The US has the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control. Well, the British CDC is rather the opposite of that. We have Cameron, Dyson, Cummings, and a cesspit of secret texts, frantic lobbying, unadulterated leakage. You wonder what Shakespeare would make of this tragic, comic, rotten state of it all. I will let Neville talk to the breaking news of this morning, revelations concerning our old friend Demonic Goings. Neville, fill us in.
Demonic Goings, well, Dominic Cummings. Listeners will remember that name was a big feature throughout much of 2020, actually. I can't remember whether we talked about him this year. Maybe we did January time. But if you go to just Google Dominic Cummings and hit the news tab on Google, and you will see every single newspaper in this country, literally, including the Knutsford Chronicle, has it on the front page. I think it was the Knutsford Chronicle. It's a regional paper that made it to the Google search results that is talking about a leak inquiry launched at number 10 Downing Street as insiders there accused Dominic Cummings of being the leaker of Boris Johnson's texts with James Dyson, he of the vacuum cleaners, and the Saudi Crown Prince, whose name I can't remember. It's not mentioned in the search results. So it's one of those things, your point, Thomas, the sleaze, that's my reaction to it. So here we go. There's more of this crap that's happening. I picked two of the reports because they're each side of the political spectrum, the Telegraph, the Guardian, to see how they're pitching this. Now, the Telegraph, a very pro-conservative paper, which certainly doesn't mean they're pro-government. Some of the time they are, much of the time they're not, particularly about individuals in government. So they're actually basically not supporting much in terms of the personalities in government. But they talk about Dominic Cummings accused of being Downing Street chatty rat leaker, which is as good a moniker as any for Cummings, I think. That could be good. He is the prime suspect, according to Telegraph, in leaking messages which implicated Boris Johnson in 2 lobbying scandals. So this isn't the story, as we all know, I think, and indeed the papers do, but it's the headline grabber. The real story is the sleaze and what's going on behind. But this report in the Telegraph is quite good. The language is great for Telegraph. He's been fingered as the likely suspect. I mean, he's not been collared quite yet in the leaking of these messages. The Saudi Crown Prince, whose name is mentioned here, Mohammed bin Salman, and separate texts with James Dyson. The former advisor, i.e. Cummings, is understood to have had access to the text messages during his time working government. What a convoluted use of English in that phrase, that is understood to have had access. No one's attributing that to anyone in particular. The source said, if you join the dots, it looks like it's coming from Dom. More than anything, the PM is disappointed and saddened by what Dom has been up to. Right, okay, good. So the Telegraph references Johnson's comment yesterday. I'm sure you all picked up on this. Absolutely no apology at all about communicating directly via text messages with these people. And Labour naturally seized on that, claiming their example of sleaze and cronyism. So we head on over to The Guardian. I like their commentary far better. They talk about the reports about Cummings could draw attention away from the contents of leaks such as text to James Dyson. That's the issue, I think. May not be the main issue, but it's the bigger issue. The inquiry won't examine a string of other leaks, says The Guardian, including a text to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman or leaked emails about donations solicited to cover the renovation of the Prime Minister's flat. So is this like the smokescreen leak inquiry that they throw up in the air, and there's clouds of smoke that obscure all these other things that really ought to be looked at as well. So that's a good focus from The Guardian. And finally, they say what appears to be a coordinated attack on Cummings. The Telegraph, Times and Sun reported the same criticisms from an unnamed insider accusing of being bitter about leaving government. So I like their comment later saying government by WhatsApp is the norm across Westminster. And there's one interesting point some of the papers have made, which I find personally quite a bit alarming, is Boris Johnson's had the same mobile phone number for 10 years, and he gives it out willy-nilly to anyone. So he's got an open phone number. Anyone can text him or call him, and that's not good.
What's the number? Okay, never mind. Before I hand over to Sam, of course, when it comes to Mohammed bin Salman, if I was a British journalist, I would be a little bit careful mentioning his name. He has a bit of a habit of being not so nice to critical journalists. Jamal Khashoggi comes to mind. Yeah. One thing that surprises me is that in your long litany, it doesn't mention the what was it, 2.6 million redo of the number 10, number 9.
Doesn't mention the number.
News briefing, yeah. The news briefing room that never was, like that football league that never was. But we will come back to that one. Yeah. Sam, your thoughts on sleaze?
It's very interesting, isn't it, that that the old enemy is back again. How foresightful of him to take screenshots of Johnson's phone that he was presumably holding when Johnson was talking. You know what? Because it's going to come in. It's going to come in handy. It reminds me of an episode in Blackadder when the Bishop of Bath and Wells is caught in flagrante delicto, and the Bishop of Bath and Wells, and there's a beautiful sort of Holbein-esque painting of the Bishop of Bath and Wells and a prostitute, and he lunges to try and rip the this fantastic picture. And Blackadder said, "But stop there. We have the preliminary sketches." So, you know, just the technology moves on. I don't think Cummings deserves the oxygen of publicity unless, unless it's going to be to really properly humble him. Well, I suppose he has been properly humbled because he features in the Beano being pulled over by the police in a new episode of the Beano. Well done, DC Thompson, for doing that. James Dyson of vacuum cleaner fame, you said. Neville, yes, yeah. And also of Brexit fame, and also of moving his HQ to Singapore because of Brexit fame. Reminds me of Lord Botham of Jockstrap. You know, all of these pro Brexit Johnson friends. One of the things that I thought was most extraordinary, and I mean, you know, I probably complained about Johnson giving classicists a bad name before, but one of the things I thought was most extraordinary is that he used a word in the text to Dyson that I've never seen anybody use before. He said, "I will fix it tomorrow." Now, yeah. I presume that means tomorrow, yeah. But I've never seen TOMO used like that. And I've seen tomos. I mean, you know, that would be appalling if Johnson was using real street language. But actually, the only meaning of tomo I could think of, it was the Greek meaning, the Greek word tomos, which means a slice. So I will, you know, a slice or a cut. Yeah. So if you give me my slice, James, I will fix it and get my slice. Thank you very much. I wonder if that was a Johnson classical allusion. I think it's, I mean, of course, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have said, you know, Tory sleaze is back. It never went away. Quite interesting what the previous Prime Minister, but one, has been getting up to in recent weeks. It's kind of fascinating, the sort of the intemperance and the inability not to have sticky fingers. And you know, you could perfectly well. Actually, I don't think you can level it at Gordon Brown. I think he was a hopeless prime minister at a bad time. I think he did some very good things as Chancellor. I think he was a really poor prime minister and wasn't cut out for kind of modern media prime ministership. I don't think he has done the rubber chicken circuit £100,000 a speech in the way that, you know, Blair has and that clearly Cameron has. But this inability to, and we'll come back to this when we talk about the European squash league. But this inability for those who have done very well to sort of want to try and do even better and use the contacts that they've made. I mean, of course, people always want to strive and do well, but you kind of think there could be a bit more dignity. And if there can't be a bit more dignity, then there should be, I mean, particularly in the case of lobbying, and I know I'm kind of going all over the place here, but in the case of lobbying, I do not think that a former prime minister should be allowed to ever lobby. Particularly as, you know, we are paying for the rest of his life for him to be protected by Secret Service officials.
He put rules in place that wouldn't happen, didn't he?
You know, he seems, well, he put rules in place that a former prime minister could not lobby for 2 years. And I wonder if it was 2 years and 1 day that DC came out and said, "Oh, I've got this rather good fund that needs a bit of help." You know, it transpires that he's been lobbying for COVID era funds as well. I mean, God, it's just hadn't we got rid of this? Hasn't, you know, clearly the fact that there is so much data and there's so much that is recoverable, including Cummings taking sneaky screenshots of Johnson's phone, it transpires that you don't get away with it, but got away with it for quite a long time. It's a nasty smell of manure all over Westminster, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And with the Conservative Party in particular, I'm thinking about what was going on in the mid-90s. With folks going to jail, Jonathan Aitken in particular. And that the whiff, well, it was more than a whiff, it was an utter stink. So do we lurch kind of an inter-between time with each political party in government? Is it like the lurch for the corruption and the sleaze and the disgustingness of it all? It just reappears every decade.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, going back to Blackadder, leaping forward from series 2 to series 3 to the Georgian era, that brilliant episode of the election that actually featured the BBC's political pundit, election night special pundit Vincent Hanna in the 18th century. But, you know, at least rotten boroughs were actually rotten boroughs. At least, you know, in the Georgian times, people were elected corruptly to govern corruptly. You know, now we have this semblance of a lack of corruption, but and we believe that our politicians are not going to be corrupt, and they're probably just as bad as.
Well, I do rather like your etymological discourse analysis of Johnson, because if you know, at least Boris Johnson is some kind of character with whatever we want to call it, Catholic tastes and, you know, Renaissance nonsense. You compare that to David Cameron and the style of his lobbying and the language that he's using. It's so bland and it's so desperate and it's so entitled in a way that just makes you cringe. I mean, playing the big man card for his mate, the Marvel supervillain named Lex Greensill. I mean, ugh.
But you know, Dave was just one of us. You know, Dave was a spin doctor. He was Carlton TV's PR guy. You know, he was just one of us guys.
Yeah, Eton, Oxford. You know, it's just, of course.
So anyway, in another order of things, what else have we got, Thomas?
I'd love to continue to wallow in the sleaze and bile and talk about property ownership in the UK and how Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the ruler of Dubai and jail of his daughter, horse racing magnate, you know, owns half of Newmarket and more than the Queen in the UK. And it's another article from The Guardian a while back. So, you know, Sam mentioned the smell and stench earlier. I do wonder whether it just all comes from us being brainwashed by the Guardian, or whether what we see is actually happening. But Sam, you had an interesting point about Newmarket and Maktoum.
Well, I mean, this, the smell and the stench of horse manure across the Suffolk Fens, all the way to Ely, where that lovely black earthed celery comes from, or at Christmas time. Sorry, I must stop being so lyrical about that.
I hate celery.
I mean, he's. We'll have to have a separate episode about celery. He's the largest single employer in the area. The investment of that oil money into sport and enormous property, and you can't in the countryside go from one place to another without seeing the black and white kind of barber poles that mark out his territory. I think there are 5 different studs around the town. I guess if that money wasn't there, Newmarket would be like Hastings, a place that I'm not that I've got anything against Hastings, but the fact that the motorway never got as far as Hastings meant that it stayed, as Robert Tressel caricatured it in his book, The Ragged Trousered Philanthropists in the 1910s, it stayed in a state of deprivation. There's no motorway or mainline railway that reaches to Newmarket, but I think the investment, it's very interesting if you are to talk to people. Some people are deeply opposed, and that might be Little England. We don't want people coming over here buying our land, and many people are holding down well-paid jobs that make use of their skills and talents for the long-term future. But I think clearly there are 2 sides. There absolutely are 2 sides, and I think that the local community is split in the way that the national community is split. But I think it's interesting. I think it gives us quite a useful bridge into thinking about sport washing, and with the Qatar World Cup coming up, but also when we think about this European Super League, a phenomenon with I was listening to a football podcast last night, a phenomenon with less life than a mayfly. It survived only 2 days in its public life. I think mayflies last possibly up to 5 days. But Manchester City and Chelsea, 2 of the richest clubs in the world, City bankrolled along with 7 other clubs by Sheikh Mansour, and Chelsea by Abramovich, who got his money by being a very hard-working civil servant in the former Soviet Union. That's right, isn't it? He earned it all.
That's how you should put it. Yes,
that's right. So those 2 clubs were the last 2 to join. By all accounts, and the first 2 to pull out, and I think it's not an original thought to say, but perhaps for Mr. Abramovich and Sheikh Mansour, sport washing is more important than a $300 million signing on fee from JP Morgan Chase.
I want to hear our resident main football fans' perspective on this, which is clearly Neville.
Go Reading.
Come on, the Royals.
Well, the one thing, and I'll hand over to you in a second, but the one thing that for me pervades all these topics and I want to talk about Earth Day later on as well, because I think that fits the same bill, which is this consistent, coherent hypocrisy that runs through all of this. This that constant clash between self-interest and morals, and having your cake and eating it. And it's exactly the same story in this football thing, the European Super Greed League. It's like it's a sorcerer's apprentice problem in a sense, where I said, please sir, I had no idea there would be awful consequences. Please can I have my cake and eat it? It's just so dishonest in a way. But anyway, before I get off on that rant, Neville, you took the drum perspective, so with a bit of marketing context, which I think is quite relevant for us.
I like the drums piece, which was published on the 21st, by the way. So as we're recording this, it's the 23rd. So 2 days ago, this lot happened in a very short period of time. This focuses on the launch of it, the announcement of it from the PR point of view. And I thought that was interesting because observing the unfolding events since last Sunday when the announcement was made, was really quite intriguing, seeing how this played out in terms of what people were saying across social networks mostly. I did like the quote in the drums piece from Mark Borkowski, who is well, they describe him as a publicist. Okay, fair enough.
Marketing guru?
I think Mark describes himself as a publicist. I mean, he's
Sure.
straight out of the school of P.T. Barnum and Malcolm McLaren.
He's been around a very long time, and his opinion I thought was quite good, the way he summarized all of this. He said the unveiling of this European Super League is no less than a historic comms disaster. He says the ESL is 3-0 down, in danger of having its entire first team squad suspended and on the brink of a violent pitch invasion all before kickoff. If that image doesn't hit home, make no mistake, this is one of the worst planned large-scale communication launches in history. He's probably right. I think it's still unveiling, by the way, the consequences and the fallout from this event. There's things popping up here and there. I saw yesterday, and that may have changed today, the Juventus guy, I think it was, it might have been Real Madrid, I can't remember now, saying this is not over yet. We're just now in pause mode, and we regroup and we'll be back. So, you know, that the battle lines are being drawn. But I think what they're being drawn about is precisely the points you're both making on the money. So it is interesting to see that if you take this take, the drum doesn't make this directly, but the kind of collapse of the plan due to you know, the pitchforks and firebrands outside each club. Some of these fan groups are exceptionally well organized. I've seen some commenting that they're funded by people with they're not football's future in heart. It's their own interests, and that may well be true. So there are others quoted in the drum piece too. They, as I said, they look at it purely from the PR point of view. And it is quite interesting what some of these folks have been saying. And it mentions, for instance, Daryl West, who's the head of sponsorship and social media at Vanarama, an auto rental brand. You might think, so what's that got to do with this? Well, they sponsored the National League in England. So he talks about what the ESL didn't do, which was a charm offensive, one way of putting it, win over the hearts and minds of the critics. I was surprised, I don't know about you guys, but thinking, okay, fine, the news broke, the reaction started coming in, where was the PR in support of the European Super League objectives and goals, why they're doing this, what's in it for everyone? There was utter silence. And it was an onslaught.
Because PR had nothing to do with it, because that was irrelevant to the way these people think, which is
well, I don't know about that, Thomas. So all I know is there was none. There was no communication whatsoever in either in defense of the critics, or better still, supporting the benefits of why they were doing this, not just to the owners of the clubs. So it all came out as if it's these owners who are benefiting and no one else was. And that seemed to be supported even by some serious misstepped communication by others who looked as though they were supporting it, but they were all saying the selfish reasons why they were doing it, which reinforced the criticism. So I think Mark Borkowski's comment is right. This was an utter disaster from a comms point of view of introducing, or indeed launching, this Super League to replace everything else that was in place. But you've then got to look at some of the other elements that, for instance, Roger Mitchell, founding CEO of the Scottish Premier League, he said that it's very simply about the control of the Champions League. That's what this is all about. It's a power play. The clubs are fed up with the UEFA control. Now, I'm not quite sure about that last statement, the clubs, because that implies the managers and the players and so forth. That may well be true, but that wasn't what was driving this. So he said he believes the media response was overblown. Well, that's as maybe. It led to the collapse of this. He does add, though, which I think, again, this is part of this. UEFA governance is very expensive. The expenses and the salaries are astronomical. A lot of people have got quite rich in this organization with no accountability. Hey, do I hear similarities with Olympics, with tennis, with all these other global bodies that look not squeaky clean? So he thinks that UEFA will tug on the heartstrings, as he says, with talk of the football family and the grassroots. Well, they've been doing that. The rebels will point to failings within the governing bodies. There'll be a lot of noise and threats, but sponsors and broadcasters would, quote, have a canary, unquote, if the rebels and their players were ousted from select competitions like the Premier League and the World Cup, as has been suggested. There is little chance of repercussions, Mitchell says. Whoever's got the best PRs will win. That's a maybe, but this is dirty. This is very dirty. This rivals, I believe, almost the sleaze thing we're talking about here. This is undercurrents of stuff going on for decades.
Well,
so will it change? Well, we'll see, won't we?
See, the funny thing is, we say, most people discussing this have a sense of history plays no role. Gary Neville, and I appreciate the public role that he played. There's the moral outrage on telly, and the role he used, the way he used his role as a pundit, as the Gary Lineker, and I think they supported the right cause. But you cannot just ignore everything that happened before, and it's not just the Premier League. I mean, we're talking about UEFA and FIFA now, upholding some kind of moral standard. I mean, that's quite funny. The FIFA was run by this Brazilian guy, João Havelange, a long time ago in the 1970s and 1980s, and the level of corruption that was reported then was truly remarkable. And then, of course, we had Sepp Blatter not so long ago. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
I mean,
but
absolutely awful. And so we're now saying these institutions are helping us, getting back to the good place.
Well, they got a PR job to do there without any doubt. But I did like Dan Rowan's quote in the Drums piece. He's a sports editor of BBC News. He says the European Super League is pursuing the fans of the future who want superstar names rather than legacy fans. Now, I think that is a very interesting comment. That may well be true, but you've also got to add into the picture, and I've not seen this commented on, but this talk of people like I quoted earlier saying that UEFA governance expensive, all the salaries astronomical, people getting rich. What about the amount of money it costs to go to see a game? The cost of season tickets. What about the hundreds of thousands of pounds a week footballers make? It is absolutely ridiculous, these huge salaries. So to me, the whole infrastructure needs to change.
Okay, I've got about 90 things to say here. I don't think
Here we go.
I was waiting for that.
So I don't think it's the media response that led to the collapse. I think it's the fact that there was cultural misappropriation by JP Morgan Chase and a cabal of rich overseas owners, particularly Henry and Blazers for Liverpool and Man United, who were the strong architects, not the clubs, the owners of the clubs. I think there's a big distinction there. Massive mistake, massive own goal, arrogant, imperialist template of sport taken from the States, from the NBA, the MLS, the NFL, the National Hockey League, all of these things. Where a club comes from is irrelevant. The LA Dodgers didn't used to be in LA. You can move a franchise across. There aren't fans that travel to go and see games in the States. You have no promotion, no relegation. Everybody, they play in. I love baseball. I'm a big fan of the Boston Red Sox, but they play in the World Series, for God's sake. What do you mean the World Series? Because you allow one Canadian team and occasionally a Japanese team, and you play one game in London. It's not the World Series. It's nonsense. So to try and think that you can take that model that works well in one country that's too big to have genuine supporters, and I'm not saying that supporters of American football franchises aren't genuine supporters, but it's not in the same way. It's been created for entertainment. Sheffield Wednesday is called Sheffield Wednesday because the steel workers from the factory had a day off on Wednesday to play on Wednesday. So there is this workers' history. God, the use of the irony or the idiocy, the cloth-eared misunderstanding for the ESL to talk about legacy fans. I mean, for God's sake, that is unbelievable. But it showed that ownership is irrelevant, because I think this was a fans' revolution. I do not believe that there may be people fermenting, working behind, but if you saw what happened outside Chelsea before the Chelsea-Brighton game, the fans, we look with wistful envy at the German system, where you have the 50+1% model, and yet the least competitive league in Europe, I think, is probably the Bundesliga, right? Is that fair to say, Thomas? How many times have Bayern won it as many times as Juve have in the league?
8 times in a row now, or something. Yeah, it's just
the fans don't own well, actually, I own as much as Lewes Community Football Club as I can, but we're in the 9th tier. At least the men's team is. The women's team is in the 2nd tier. But the fans are very, very, very important. And the cloth-eared idiocy of JP Morgan Chase to think that they could impose a structure from North America on Europe is completely bonkers. But I mean, I also think that there is rank hypocrisy. So what you were touching on, I completely agree, Neville. And I'm not picking on Arsenal here, Thomas, but I did a little bit of digging because, you know, we are the small data forum here. So I looked at what was the typical and the most expensive season ticket in the last season that fans were allowed in 1920. Well, it happened to be Arsenal, £2,013 for a season ticket. What does that get you? 30 games, possibly. You know, the playoff. So the thing that we love so much, and that clubs are talking about, the playoff game to go up from the Championship to the Premiership is known as the 170 million game because of Sky money to take the Premier League. The billions that Sky, I think it's 5 billion was the last round. The club who wins the playoffs, the 3rd club to be promoted, if they go up, they get 170 million to spend on players, infrastructure, social media. I don't know what they spend their money on, players' salaries. That one game, you know, a single goal is worth hundreds. But it's rank hypocrisy to say that this is a people's game now. I mean, people power, I think, is. And maybe I misinterpreted you saying there it was the media response that led to the collapse. The media response couldn't keep up with the speed of the
That's better said.
And was just, you know, it was like I don't know, it was like Brexit, or it was like, you know, early COVID, or it's like you know, such incredible speed.
I mean, Germany is not the land of milk and honey in all of this, no. But I think it's worth pointing out, and to link this also to Brexit to a certain extent. There is an underlying social liberal, almost ordo-liberal, but I'm not an economist, but I know ordo-liberalism because it's the Freiburg school, and that's where I'm from. So it's kind of a grounding of capitalism that brings worker representation into business, and it brings fan representation into football and all these sorts of things. Germany is a super modern, successful state, but it managed to hold on to some of those principles, and it does it in a way that these German commercial institutions operate in a way that it seems like they're the better of bad solutions in a way. When you compare it to the UK with the complete deregulation over the 40 years, that stuff makes a massive difference. It does. And if I now hear that in the UK, Johnson and others, you know, sort of declared hardcore liberals, if you want, keep talking and thinking about that German model, if they only adopt a little bit of it, that would not be a bad way forward.
There are two. I think you're completely right. It would be good if there was a bit more competition in the Bundesliga, right? It'd be good if the money was split more evenly. But two other things I want to say. One was when you were championing Reading, Neville, it made me think of. So I was brought up about 10 miles outside Oxford, and the first in the countryside there, and the first game I ever went to see was an Oxford United game at the old Manor Ground in Headington in Oxford. No longer there. It's now somewhere out on the bypass. But Robert Maxwell. Do we remember Robert Maxwell? Robert Maxwell, the owner of the Mirror Group newspapers and man who probably fell off a super yacht in 1991.
The pension fund plunderer. That one.
Yeah, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell. Who's popped up in the news recently. But he owned Oxford United because he was a man of the people. And he also then bought Reading. And he had this plan to create the Thames Valley Royals. He was going to merge two clubs. Now, the Reading-Oxford rivalry is not like, I don't know, Man United, Liverpool, or Arsenal, Tottenham, or West Ham, Chelsea. But it's a rivalry, right? And there's some legacy in this awful word of the ESL. And again, fan power told Maxwell exactly what he got very, very far advanced with it. He bought the land where the new stadium between was going to be. He got very, very far advanced, and he was not allowed to do it. The other thing I wanted to bring up, so you talked about the comms aspect, Neville, with some great eloquence and picking out that excellent piece in the drum. I completely agree about that, and particularly with what Mark Bukowski says there. But I was having a conversation yesterday with a collaborator. We were talking about insight. You know, the importance of proper data-driven insights. You know, I'm quite interested in that kind of thing. Now,
see, I think this is really a space where somebody should write a good book about. But
yeah, if only we were live on there we are.
The word's my sponsor. Yeah, okay.
But the insight. The insight, every good brand or communications brief will start. What insight drives this brief? I remember in my time working with Unilever brands, I once got one that said from PG Tips, I will finger them as Cummings was fingered, that said mums like tea. I think that was the worst one I ever saw. Millennials eat differently from the way their parents do. Thank you. That's a casual observation, not an insight. Anyway, but the failure of insight, the failure to get inside the mind of your customers, in the case of the ESL, your customers being the fans, and they absolutely are. So Florentino Perez, the Real Madrid up to his neck in debt, still has. I don't think Real Madrid have pulled out yet, have they?
There's still two. There's two clubs still in it.
I think Juve and Real, they'll be playing each other every week.
Yeah.
But it'll be the Cristiano Ronaldo derby every single week. Who will he play for this week? But the failure of insight that Perez still holds to.
Yeah.
Perez's insight is 16 to 24-year-olds don't like football. That's his insight. That is the insight that drove. So, as you say, Neville, this hideous phrase, the legacy fans. The legacy fans, we can sort of ignore them because we want to get the young, high-spending, social active. 16 to 24s don't like football. I know probably about 30 16 to 24s. I've got a 17-year-old son. They'll give me the time of day. I know one of them who doesn't love football. Yeah. So I could give Florentino a little focus group if he wanted, but it's a failure of insight, a failure of communication, and what I think. Sorry, one other thing that I think is fascinating. So Jurgen Klopp, from the German tradition, the German football tradition, the German economic tradition, the manager of Liverpool, interviewed on Monday night before the game, said he didn't like it and it made him feel uncomfortable. He was the first official to speak out. Pep Guardiola, where he also did it. Jordan Henderson, Liverpool captain, had a meeting of Premier League captains, because he has a group of Premier League captains not playing at the moment, injured, where they all discussed and expressed their distaste and their dislike for it. All of the Liverpool players tweeted out a card and Instagrammed a card saying they didn't like it, and there will be no sanction against them. The crocodile tears from John W. Henry, the Liverpool owner of Fenway Sports. In my house, we support the Red Sox, and it's, apart from my aberration of supporting Fulham, that it's a Liverpool supporting house. But the crocodile tears that there were from him. The only thing that I feel confused about, the only thing I really feel confused about, is that Jose Mourinho, one of the least empathetic, most self-aggrandizing individuals in the history of sport, was sacked during this, and one, it didn't get the oxygen that it deserved. Yeah. Two, it's possible that he was sacked because he was going to refuse to take his players into Daniel Levy's new dream of the European Super League. Amazing that something that, as I say, had the life of a mayfly should see off dear old Jose from this planet. I rest my case.
That was good. That was excellent, Sam. I think you're right. I think the communication aspect of it is what really intrigues me more than anything, more than the money and the JP Morgan bit, although that's important. The drum summary is quite good, but that was 2 days ago, so things have changed further from that. So I don't believe this is over at all by any means, and it will be interesting to see how this is communicated, how the ESL as was or as is or still is or what it might be is going to unpause themselves if that is what is happening with them. You mentioned something interesting there, Sam, too, about the what do you call it, the managers group, the players at Liverpool who all tweeted out the consistent messaging. That suggests some kind of organization that wasn't individually spontaneous. So in bits and pieces like that, this contributed to the thing, but the passion driving it, to my mind, was a key thing here. People were seriously motivated to not support this because they, for reasons like you quoted Klopp saying, distaste for it, didn't like it, all that, and then all the other quotes people have made that embellished on that. But that was the core of it, and the motivation was very strong to do whatever they could to articulate that. But there was no organization of it. Arguably, that might not have helped. But I'm wondering what this firm In-House Communications was there for then, because they didn't seem to do anything.
I think
Not
that's
certainly visible. No.
I think that's a really valid point. But I mean, as I was saying earlier, I see, communication had no role to play in this whatsoever.
No,
and it's something that I find rather fascinating because, on the one hand, and I do a fair amount of teaching right now, and in the sort of communications and a bit of measurement and evaluation space and so on, and so I'm bringing to students and course members and all of that, the latest thinking in the industry, and here's another perspective, and there's a lot about business purpose, and we need to be more focused on that, corporate social responsibility and stakeholder relationship management, the Global Alliance for Communication and PR and Communication Management, big global head organization of all these PR associations around the world. In February, they published a new, what they call the 2021 Global PR and Communication Model. And it's based on a lot of research. It's really good stuff that's going in there. And it's like a cross-cultural global perspective, practitioners, scholars, students, and so on, big, surveys and everything. And so they boil it down. And so they have this new model, this new concept, which has purpose at the core. And then around it is wrapped brand culture and reputation and reputation risk and all that sort of stuff. I believe in that. I believe that is the right thing to do. But I then look at the reality of this ESL launch, for example. It was done by Florentino Perez, who is said to be one of the mightiest men in Spain. He's 74 years old. He doesn't give a toss about what anybody says, because in his personal experience over 50 years in business, what he does happens, and he gets things right. So therefore, that's how things happen. And the people he was working with are the likes of, what's his name? Andrea Agnelli, the heir of the Agnelli clan, of Fiat fame and Juventus and all of that. And Joel Glazer, son of, whatever old Mr. Glazer is called. These people it doesn't mean anything to them that you would, think about purpose other than making money. And that's okay for the way in which they run their businesses. And that's how it operates. PR didn't come into it. Will there be a wake-up call for them? Will it make the slightest bit of difference? I have severe doubts. I mean, people talk about the ESL idea coming back. I think it will, because that's how American sport has been run for decades and successfully in the US. So they will try that again. Will it ultimately overcome European culture? I hope not. It would break my heart, because I love the way, I love football. I love the way it's structured. I wish there was less money in it. I'm happy that Freiburg is still 9th in the Bundesliga with no money. Go Freiburg. But I'm not in the slightest surprised about the complete lack of PR perspective. It's just a pure expression of entitled arrogance on the part of the people running it.
God, I'm depressed to hear that this new model has got purpose at the heart of it. That's table stakes. That's table stakes.
I shouldn't have mentioned it.
Jesus Christ. God. But for exactly the reasons that you expressed your disappointment. One footnote, In-House Communications, described by the floppy-haired buffoon who lives at number 10 and spends 2.6 million on things he doesn't let Allegra Stratton use. Just In-House Communications described as the Fortnum & Mason of PR companies. He did, didn't he? What an arse.
I'm a little bit conscious of time. We've been rambling highly intelligently in a most sophisticated way for almost 44 minutes. Does anybody have any appetite to comment on yesterday's Earth Day and how the marketing industry again jumped on a green tinged bandwagon?
I refer the honourable gentleman to my comments about purpose made a moment ago.
Good enough.
Very good.
Yeah.
Neville, anything to add?
No, only that I did tweet out a support tweet about it yesterday, pointing to a page on the earth.org website, which I thought was quite good for many people. 51 things you yourself can do to save the planet. And there are a lot of interesting things. There's a handful that are easy to do. So head on over to that. Just go to earth.org and look for that.
Yeah. I sort of, apparently it was the 51st Earth Day. So when you count,
that's why there's 51 then. Now I wonder why there was 51. Yeah, okay.
When you count that back, that takes you to April 1970, which I found quite funny because 1970 is also the year that Milton Friedman, one of the fathers of neoliberal free market capitalism, published this big Friedman doctrine in the New York Times. The social responsibility of business is increasing profits, making money for shareholders. There is no responsibility to public or society. There's only responsibility to its shareholders. So for 50 years, we've had this and Earth Day running in parallel. And I think it's fair to say, at least from my vantage point, it hasn't been going that well overall.
What hasn't been going well? The Earth Day or the? I think the greatest celebration of Earth Day is the fact that the only loyalty to the shareholders that is manifested in the ESL has had a spectacular balls up. I'm not so worried about it coming back. I have to say, I think it will come back. This has been floated before, but this is the most serious instantiation there has been. They lined up the lawyers and the half-assed PR firms. More than they had done before. I'm sure it'll come back, but I think it's God, if there had been fans in the grounds in Chelsea and at Leeds, Leeds had an official painted banner saying you need to earn your right, and all the players warmed up in very hostile. I can't remember what they said, but maybe we can find it for the show notes. But you need to earn it. You need to earn the right to. You need to earn the right. The Leeds players, which was basically aimed at intimidating the Liverpool players, when the Liverpool players themselves were and the management were completely against it. It was their remote capitalist, driven only by a profit motive. That's their only Milton Friedman responsibility. It's them that's doing it. I'm not trying to exculpate any of the 12 clubs, but it's interesting. I think well done, people, for winning one over against business this week. Good on you.
Good one.
Fine. Shall we come to
call it a day?
A well-deserved end then.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this
bit
was
of
fun.
Here, Neville. bit of wizardry here for you, Neville.
Yeah, thank you.
Snip, snip.
Yep.
So, sorry to cut you guys off. That was it for another episode of the Small Data Forum podcast. The romantic, nostalgic spirit of European football has been preserved. We're very happy about that, which means Bayern Munich will continue to win German titles in perpetuity. Middle Eastern and Russian oil money will continue to win the Premier League. So it's all good. On that note, if you like what you hear and read from us, let us know. Rate us, review us, as always, critique us, get involved, engage and connect. Tell us and others what you think of this podcast. Become part of the family. Follow us on Twitter at SDF Podcast, or visit our website at www.smalldataforum.com, where all the previous podcasts and extended show notes and links are available and accessible. Visit Neville's and Sam's sites at www.nevillehobson.com and www.insideagents.co.uk. Thanks for listening. Stay healthy. Think critically. Wear a mask. Stay physically but not socially distant, even post-lockdown. And we'll be back in a month or so with more informed opinion or opinionated information, or both. Bye for now.
Great. We can hit our stop buttons. And
that was 46.